Welcome to the debate.
Our focus today is on Michele Marie Dalene, who is better known in many online spaces as the North American Snow Queen, or NASQ.
Right. And her public output is just vast. It's this incredible mix of personal diaries, really deep technical discussions, and some truly breathtakingly chaotic political commentary. It's made her a figure of, significant visibility.
Highly polarized visibility, I'd say. And the material surrounding her, it presents this undeniable public spectacle. But I think we have to dissect why. Why has she achieved this particular kind of notoriety?
Exactly. And that brings us to our central question. Should her public output and behavior be classified as, quote, Lolcow content? Now, for anyone who isn't familiar with the term, a Lolcow is basically a figure whose public self-parody or apparent lack of self-awareness becomes the main reason for their fame. The content goes viral because people are drawn in to document and, frankly, ridicule what looks like uncontrolled dysfunction. And I'm going to argue today that the chaotic, deeply personal, and highly volatile nature of her output absolutely fulfills the requirements of that archetype. The content, in the end, functions as spectacle.
And I'll be taking the opposing view. Look, I can't deny she invites ridicule. That's obvious. But I think labeling her output solely as Lolcow it's just reductive. It completely ignores her explicit, documented efforts to define her own presence as a purposeful performance career, to build a brand and to operate a legitimate, if, struggling, content business. I see her as a conscious performer trying to monetize her own unique volatility, not just an accidental subject of mockery.
Okay, so let's start there. Let's establish the parameters for my argument. The Lolcow designation, it rests on the evidence that this high visibility dysfunction and self-generated spectacle, it just consistently overwhelms any real attempt at intellectual or professional work. I mean, NASCOM might start a stream discussing, some intricate governmental bill or electrical engineering principles, but the conversation just inevitably collapses into these deeply personal, non sequitur disclosures. And that's what maximizes public fascination.
But see, I think that collapse is the performance. When we look at the sheer volume of chaotic material, the constant, unpredictable drama with her partner Ed, who, she's documented calling a dumb motherfucker on stream, or that open mic call where she gets accused of fraud, I don't think these are mistakes. I think they're engagement accelerators. I see pretty clear evidence that she views that controversy as the engine for her viewership.
I see where you think that. And I agree, chaos drives views. But I have to challenge the premise of control. If this is all a conscious performance for shock value, then the creator has to maintain some kind of editorial control over the narrative. And the disclosures? They frequently go way beyond professional shock. They become genuine, painful vulnerability that seems almost oblivious to how it's being received by the public. Just consider the level of TMI. The public discussions about CBTs, swinger clubs, specific details about her history with sexual partners, or even mentioning really sensitive medical issues like being sterile, thyroid medication side effects, or the detailed use of the P-tube, that female urinal device. This relentless sharing of boundary-shattering intimacy, it feels less like strategic performance art and more like a compulsion to document a life in crisis. And that is the foundational element that Lolcow audiences crave.
I'd argue, though, that modern digital performance requires blurring those lines. This TMI is strategically volatile. She understands her audience demands access, and she uses that access to define her brand. So she isn't just reacting to chaos. She is actively curating a brand called the North American Snow Queen. She uses self-aware branding, like the greeting "Hail and Merry Meet," and she explicitly says that NASQ is when she's got her mojo. That, to me, suggests a distinct, performative identity that she's deploying.
That's a compelling point about branding, I'll give you that. But branding and performance can still end up as spectacle if the execution is just incoherent. And that brings us to our first point, deliberate performance versus unintentional spectacle.
If the goal here is entrepreneurship and branding, why would you make that brand inextricably linked to what so many viewers see as uncontrolled, even painful personal disintegration? The public documentation of her personal life is the content, not the engineering discussion she occasionally anchors it to.
And I would frame those controversial elements, the P-tube talk, the strip club hypotheticals, the ed drama, as modern shock jock tactics. It's not unlike the Loveline show that she actually references. She shows a clear awareness of platform limitations, like when she deleted a controversial video with Ed because of political content rules. She actively wants to avoid the channel becoming a greasy stain on the sidewalk. That proves she's trying to manage the narrative and the platform's constraints, which is what distinguishes her from someone who is just purely spiraling.
I'm not convinced that managing platform rules is the same as managing the performance. And her attempts at financial stability, that's another point of rupture for me. So this brings us to point 2, financial strategy and the e-begging critique. If she is a serious content provider, why the continuous, explicit use of the channel to solicit funds for? Well, for highly personal and immediate needs. Money for tobacco, money for food. The constant financial solicitation proves that the show's survival really relies on panhandling, regardless of the tremendous product she claims she's providing alongside it.
I have to disagree that the financial appeals negate her status as a creator. We need to honor the substantive distinction she makes herself. She defines classic e-begging as, quote, "I'm broke, my cat's starving," a purely passive, crisis-driven plea. She explicitly counters this. She frames viewer contributions as support for labor, and she compares her hustle to a professional musical performer busking on a street corner. She is asserting that the production of complex, entertaining, or controversial content is a service that merits payment.
But the evidence undermines that assertion. If this is really about supporting a high-quality service, why are the funding appeals so often tied to chaotic, petty, or, low-stakes needs? If she were asking for money for equipment upgrades or studio rent, that would support the tremendous product narrative. But when the streams pivot to driving a semi-truck simulator just to justify the cost of the stream or to buy small, immediate consumables, it looks a lot less like supporting a service and a lot more like immediate desperation-driven panhandling.
I would point, though, toward her clear entrepreneurial ambition. She isn't just seeking immediate handouts. She wants to become a marketable asset. She's actively working to meet producers and get her writing published. And look at the practical business concern she shows. She details the logistics of her merchandise. Her decision to sell single-color t-shirts because of lower inventory costs and higher profit margins compared to multicolor shirts, like those of a creator she brings up, John Tron. That's the mindset of a struggling entrepreneur who's concerned with branding and fiscal strategy, not just a panhandler.
That is a strong piece of evidence about her intent. I'll grant you that. But intent is irrelevant if the final output is consumed as ridicule because it's fundamentally incoherent. And this leads us to our final point, intellectual coherence and reality testing. The attempts at intellectual depth are just constantly undermined by claims that can only be classified as, delusional pronouncements. And that's a classic marker of content consumed as spectacle.
Okay.
How can anyone reconcile these detailed discussions of circuit theory with claims like believing in reverse seasonal affective depression that's linked to demonic possession, or her assertion that she can change the weather in Utah because she is the snow queen? And we can't overlook the cosmological claim that angels and God are, quote, technically extraterrestrials. This consistent inability to maintain a stable, fact-based narrative or to distinguish fantasy from reality is what makes the persona so compellingly unstable for external documentation. And yes, mockery.
I'm sorry, but I just don't buy that it's simple delusion. That's too simplistic. She approaches even these unconventional conclusions using sophisticated frameworks of expertise. She relies on documented self-testing to maintain her credibility. I mean, she frequently mentions undergoing the full Minnesota multiphasic profile inventory too, the MMPI-2, a highly detailed, standardized psychological assessment to define and defend her internal world. Even when she's discussing the bizarre, like her belief that hell is freezing cold instead of fire, she often roots this conclusion in some kind of pseudoscientific or structured theological reasoning. She's applying expertise in STEM, in detailed analysis of complex government bills, even in astrology, to construct a consistent, if alternate, internal reality. She's building a unique worldview, not just randomly spinning off spectacle.
But that distinction between unconventional and functionally unstable is the absolute key to the Lolcow classification. When a figure's self-description, "I can change the weather," directly contradicts observable reality, the audience is naturally drawn in to document that cognitive dissonance, that grandiosity, that inability to self-correct based on external facts. That is the fuel. It suggests a lack of the critical self-awareness you need for controlled performance art. The performance becomes secondary. The documentation of instability is primary.
I do acknowledge that the volatility of the content guarantees its documentation. I do. However, the intentionality behind that volatility, I think, separates her from purely accidental figures of ridicule. She actively seeks out controversy, and she uses this highly personalized, often technical language to create a niche that's really challenging to categorize. She is deliberately trying to be provocative and polarizing, which is a conscious performance choice, even if it often backfires spectacularly.
I will concede that Michele Marie Dalene clearly demonstrates significant, sustained effort and intent in creating her content, and in attempting to build financial structures around that very complex, very erratic identity. The branding is deliberate, and the hustle is real.
And I, in turn, must acknowledge that her performance style frequently veers far into the strange and the chaotic. And it generates exactly the kind of highly public documentation that fuels the Lolcow narrative. The resulting spectacle often does overtake the initial intent.
Ultimately, though, she may define herself as an expert, an advocate, and a performer, working her hustle, the final output is, I think, inextricably tied to spectacle, TMI, and confrontational interactions that primarily feed the public appetite for documenting eccentricity. Her product may be defined as performance, but its function is often documentation.
The material really does offer a complex study in online identity, the economics of visibility, and that precarious line between self-defined performance and public ridicule. So the question remains for the listener: does the demonstrable effort and intellectual framework she applies, even if it is misdirected, outweigh the resulting public function as a figure of highly scrutinized spectacle?